Lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my complete honor and privilege to welcome Strive Masiyiwa here with us this afternoon. I know he actually doesn't need any introduction, but I know equally that I am the envy of most of you in the room to have this opportunity to have a conversation with you live, Strive. So thank you for finding the time. I know your schedule is enormously busy. And given all those demands, we are extremely fortunate to have you with us here this afternoon.
Thank you.
So thank you. I think a round of applause would be a good idea. Now, Strive has just as we were walking up, he said to me, the first thing that happened to me this morning was really interesting, you know, Karen. And I said, well, what was that? And I think I'd like him to share with you what he told me, because I think it sort of sets the context of a day in the life of Strive Masiyiwa. So Strive, please tell the audience what happened to you first thing this morning.
I woke up, anyway, first of all, it's great to be here and to see you all, particularly after the pandemic, to see such a great audience for Africa. It's wonderful. Thank you for being here and in this amazing place. But I was just joking with Karen that I woke up to South African press calling me to say I had bought a football club. And so, you know, with no disrespect to the fans of the football club, I hadn't heard of them. But, you know, I didn't buy a football club this morning, and you know, but it was better than what I was supposed to have bought yesterday. So,
Strive, thank you for that. It sort of puts the day in perspective, doesn't it, for most of us. You mentioned it yourself. The last time we spoke to you was under very different circumstances when our chairman, Rob Hertzog, interviewed you virtually during the height of the pandemic, and that was in 2020. Here we are 18 months later, all in the same room together. Wonderful occasion, fantastic building. But going back, that conversation, the focus was all around the collective effort of the AU Special Task Force, which President Ramaphosa set up. And you yourself have said to me you were speaking to him 2-3 times a week during that time, with a team of real African business leaders and thought leaders working with you, a fantastic team that you had tackling it. We're not going to dwell on it too long, but I thought it would be interesting to ask you, what lessons do you think, you know, we've learned coming through that as Africa, and where do you think these can be applied again, given the challenging circumstances we found ourselves in the moment, once again, having thought that after COVID, you know, that might be it for a while, but clearly not.
No, thank you, Karen. You know, as some of you will recall, President Ramaphosa appointed me as the African COVID czar in May 2021. I guess I was at it for almost 2 years. No, it was May 2020, I'm sorry. And at the time, you know, kind of looking back, the president was that year's chair of the African Union. And he called me and he said, look, I need you to lead the task force for the pandemic. And he says, the reports I've seen suggest we could lose anything between 10 and 20 million Africans. And so you have to do this on a full-time basis. So I took up the job. We were both pretty much terrified. Yeah. You know, we're having those conversations. And we met virtually every day as a task force. Professor Orama, who's here, yes, was a member of the task force. And it's very difficult from an African Union perspective because it's not a centralized budget system. Mm-hmm. We don't have central control of a budget in the same way you would do in the European Union. And the African countries had never dealt with a crisis of that scale, that's continental. But the heads of state were incredible. They had their own committee of 10 heads of state that met with the task force every 2 weeks. So we were reporting in every 2 weeks. But it was unique in the sense that it was the first time they had ceded the leadership of a crisis to someone from business. And the majority of us were from business. And they trusted us because we operate across so many different countries. And they trusted us to raise the money, to negotiate with the suppliers when the vaccines became available. But one of the key lessons, of course, which is, again, to my colleagues from the business world, don't shy away from taking up responsibilities like that. And it was interesting that none of my colleagues from business, when we would call them to say, we need you to do this, we need you to organize at national level, at a regional level, we need you to chair, we need you to provide leadership. Everybody responded incredibly.
Even though they had day jobs.
I mean, South African business leaders, Dangote led the group from Nigeria, I know Mo, these guys, they were all running around because we didn't know what this crisis would throw up. But the second lesson for me was everybody knew it was a global pandemic that had no borders. It was extraordinary how, particularly in the developed countries, they reacted very nationally. It was all about how do you protect your own country, as opposed to say, how do we deal with a global pandemic? And that is what made it difficult to deal with. But there are many lessons, and probably this isn't the right audience this isn't the right platform. But I think we all need to appreciate that it's a question of when rather than if another one comes. I mean, I was responsible on the Ebola pandemic. And, I remember we were having a meeting with Bill Gates, and he said, we just dodged a bullet. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's not airborne. Well, this one was. Ebola was deadly, but it wasn't airborne.
Yeah.
So all of us need to think about how we reacted both at a business level and national, global, for the next one. Because it's not a question of if, it's when.
And so sort of taking that in context and sort of projecting forward to where we are now, sort of 18 months later, what is your overall feel and thoughts on the overall economic situation, sort of both globally and in terms of Africa and the role that Africa will play on that global stage, if you like?
Look, one of the lessons which was very useful as African countries, when we started, initially our own countries tried to get to vaccines and things like that on their own. When I was appointed, we had meetings with the different countries. For example, I remember meeting with Nigeria. And we said, you're the biggest country, you've got 200 million people. You're trying to buy vaccines, and you're being ignored. how about if we got together as 1.3 billion people? It was the first time we had an order to buy something as 1.3 billion people. Overnight, we were the single largest buyer of anything. And that's how we eventually forced our way to the door. We said, how about beginning to think of Africa as a collective? Not just talk about it, let's act on it. So I was empowered with Professor Orama to go out and buy 1 billion vaccines. You know, we would call the suppliers and say, we need 1 billion vaccines. Are you going to ignore us? Because we can talk about it again in a couple of years, remembering how you ignored us. And everybody talked to us.
I'm sure.
So now the presidents say, why don't we do this with other things? Why don't we do this with fertilizer, with food, with machinery? Because we're so used to buying as little cantons. So Africa is a big market. We're $2.5 trillion. That's not to be slouched away at. So how do we make this function as a real titan? We're almost as big as India as an economy, and we've got 1.3 billion people. So instead of talking about your country's GDP, how about talking about the continental GDP? About the continental market, how do we make that work? Well, this particular crisis forced us to think and operate and put that into effect. So, and it was fascinating.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and obviously we've heard this morning from Professor Rama, from His Excellency Wamkele Mene, all around the AFCFTA and what the AFICFTA Bank team have been doing, which is hugely important and impressive in terms of their ambition on the continent. But when we look at the AFCFTA and the ratification of the different countries across the AU, I mean, what is your view of this historical agreement, and how do you see it affecting businesses and how businesses operate? You operate a number of businesses across the continent. What do you see as the practical benefits, I suppose, and advantages of the agreement?
Look, I'm a little biased on it because I was on the task force that worked on it. So, we were pushing, and I worked on the AU reform task force during President Kagame's tenure. So the AFCFTA is a very powerful instrument. That goes without doubt. But the hard work is ahead of us. It's about putting it into effect, making it work. And we haven't yet fully persuaded everybody about its benefits. So that's the work ahead. But no doubt, this is the only way for Africa. We have to be able to create an African market, both internally and externally. And it requires this and many other pieces to come that must be effected.
And I mean, it's obvious in some ways to see how it could affect, those Dangotes and so on, your big multinationals that are operating across the continent. But in many ways, they can open many of those doors themselves. I mean, how do you see it affecting the entrepreneurs and the smaller businesses, the SMEs? How will they benefit from it? Because I guess your message is we need to get the message out even wider, and they really form the backbone of that African economy, the informal economy and the SME economy.
Look, it's important that we recognize that there are some things that only bigger businesses can do. That's just the reality of business. It's important, when we look at the FCTA, it's important that we present the African marketplace as to would-be investors. And it's extremely important that we open up Africa ourselves. An investor coming in to Kenya should feel that once they have, if let's say they are a manufacturing concern or they're producing something, can they move their goods to Ghana? How easily can they really feel they're in Nigeria? That's when the practical implementation. Small businesses then are just become beneficiaries of that. Everybody benefits if we get consistent growth across the continent. So there are so many other pieces that need to come into place, but it's a huge step in the right direction.
So Strive, talking about pioneers and large companies, you're a pioneer in African telecommunications, and you've also built a number of other digital technology businesses since you started as an entrepreneur back in Zimbabwe in the 1990s. Some of your newer companies are huge data centers, clouds, cybersecurity, renewable energy, etc., fintech. The list goes on, and I won't give that whole list here. But looking back, I mean, what lessons do you think helped you early on to make a success of these businesses? And did you find that, was it like a cookie cutter? Could you just sort of move from one to another, no matter what the business or the sector was? Or what were those lessons?
I think, Karen, coming from a smaller African country, which my country is, it's a small African country, I was able to recognize pretty quickly that if we were going to grow, we needed to embrace the African continent, perhaps in a way that a colleague in Nigeria may not, or someone in South Africa may not, because they've got this huge, big country, big economy. But I knew that if I was going to build a bigger business, then it must be I must see markets beyond my own country. And in those early days, I used to engage people in South Africa. I lived in South Africa, as you know. And they couldn't see that particular aspect of it. And building a business, today we are in over 30 African countries. We've got boots on the ground in that many countries. That was difficult. It was high maintenance. You know, you're waking up so many different political issues. So one of the challenges is also getting leaders on the ground themselves to see the benefits of being part of a bigger Africa. Because we talk Africa, but we often don't act Africa. Okay? So if you're a leader in this room from an African country, that's a challenge for you. Okay, because it's going to be a give and take. You're going to have to give up something to be part of a bigger pie.
And would you say that's very much part of the sort of skill set and mindset, if you like, that you need today in terms of growing a business in Africa or anywhere in the world? That sort of wider vision, if you like, the strategy. I mean, what do you think about getting Africa's people, and I suppose here we're really looking at Africa's youth and the young people, ready for the fourth industrial revolution? I mean, how ready do you think Africa is for that next step, if I can put it that way?
Look, the mean age of the African continent is 19.7. So it's the world's youngest continent. But having young people is not enough. We have to have skilled young people. The battleground, if we are going to be a part of that fourth industrial revolution, really boils down to how we skill up our young people. We absolutely must focus on skills, technical skills, okay? It's, not all my children are technical like I am, okay? So, and I wouldn't force them to say, go and do maths when you can't do anything, when all you can do is maths. But the reality is we need to invest in science, we need to invest in technology, we need to push those kids who can do those things, because that is crucial to competing with the likes of China and India as big continental. China is 1.4 billion people, India is 1.3, we are 1.3 billion people. But how are we doing on a skills level? We can't talk our way to this. We have to skill up our kids. So I can't overemphasize the importance of that. But the glass is half full for me. When you have got so many young people, it's exciting. But we have to attend to the education, the basic education, and drive through from that education to skills.
Well, I know because I was doing a little bit of research, as you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, and I had a look at Strive's Facebook posts and his comments and his Facebook page, and I asked him about this, and incredibly, he actually admits that he wrote those posts and mentoring messages to the entrepreneurs and to the Facebook groups himself, which is, that is incredible given your busy schedule. So it is obviously of enormous importance to you, this investment of your time into bringing on these entrepreneurs and bringing on the young.
No, that is so true. I did it for 8 years. Every morning I would get up and I would write a post on entrepreneurship to my nearly 6 million followers. And Facebook said that my followers were the most engaged followers of anyone on Facebook in terms of their engagement on the issue. So that was very exciting. But I also had to put a line to say to them, I'm only going to do it to a certain point because I need you. It's not about being followed. I need you to go and work on what I've taught you. But it shows you the hunger and the energy on the continent for entrepreneurship. So that was really an exciting piece of work to do.
And you mentioned earlier about advising children, and I know you have 6 children, and we were discussing the ages of our respective children earlier when we met up, and I said, do your children take your advice more than my children take my advice? And so Strive, share your answer with the audience, because...
Well, when they're in front of me, they pretend not to follow my advice. But when they get into trouble or they are challenged, it's amazing how quickly the training kicks in. So, they suddenly say, I did this, Dad, because you said I should do this. I said, I don't remember you listening to me. So, no, it's important to engage in the core values with young people and our children, but still allowing them, the choices that they themselves must go out and make.
And do you think, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, I hope, but do you think any of your children will follow you into Econet, into your business? Or do they want to plough their own furrow over there?
They're a bit of both. Some obviously work here in the city in London. My children are not young. But there are some that are involved in various aspects of the business, and some even started their own businesses. So, it would be fantastic if they can ultimately do that and go on to do even better things.
Strive, I think coming back, if I may, then to Econet, which you started back in 1993, And at that stage, telephone density, as you called it, was such that 75% of Africans didn't have a phone, or, and I found this incredible, hadn't even heard a phone ring. I mean, what is the situation today, and how have you seen that change over all that time?
Well, as you say, it was in our court papers before the Zimbabwe Supreme Court, because we had to fight for the removal of the monopoly. And we said that the teledensity was 0.75% across Africa. Just less than 1% of the population had access to a telephone. But 75% had never heard a telephone ringing at that time. That was 94. Today, 75% of all Africans own a telephone. Okay? And it was done by the private sector. It was done by industry, both African entrepreneurs and global entrepreneurs went out and did this. You know, we had African players like ourselves, MTN, Vodacom, as well as the global players like Vodafone, Bharti Airtel, Orange. This was a good thing. Africa opened the doors for this investment, which is the single largest investment outside oil and gas, went into the telecom sector. So today there are more people with a mobile phone than in Europe and America put together in Africa. Wow. The challenge for us is not to sit on the glow of that success, but to move to the next level, which is what we've been investing in. I haven't invested in a mobile network for 10, 15 years because that was done, it's finished. Okay, if you bring me a mobile license, I will stick it on the notice board and laugh at you. Because that's not what we're in. We're about building the next generation of digital infrastructure. We have invested in building fiber networks across Africa. We have over 100,000 kilometers of fiber that we built ourselves.
From Cape
to Cairo. We completed Cape to Cairo about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. We've now reached Dakar, going west. We've just done one of the most complex builds, which was to go from the Atlantic coast through the DRC in partnership with Facebook and Google. Mm-hmm. We've actually built all the way now to Dar es Salaam, cutting across through the Sahara, through the Congo rainforest. So we're laying down this digital infrastructure. But then we've also built data centers. And we are building data centers in all the major cities of Africa at the moment. We have a project we're building, which we call Project Decima, 10 of the largest African cities. We've bought land there, and we're building data centers. So we've got to build cloud, we've got to prepare for artificial intelligence, we've got to be there. Otherwise, Africa cannot remain a competitive place.
No, I hear you and your investment. I've written down $3.5 billion US dollars.
Which is what we put into fiber infrastructure, yeah. And we're still building. We build over 100 kilometers a week. So,
really, really hugely important, as you say, in terms of Africa's next steps and in terms of the dominance. I mean, what is, from your perspective, the next market opportunity in Africa? If you were looking either at the telecoms sector or at another one, where would you put your investment if you were an investor?
No, this is a riddle I used to play with the young people, young entrepreneurs on Facebook. I would say, what is the best business to be in? Mining. Do you want to be in mining? Do you want to be in telecoms? Do you want to be in supermarkets? And they'd all miss the riddle, get caught up in the question and say, mining. I said, no, they're all the same. You invest in what you're in, you know. If we need it all. We need people in healthcare. We need people in tourism. We need people in mining. We just need people one who know what they're doing and come at it with integrity. Mm-hmm. That's all. But otherwise, Africa is open for it all. And my hope is actually to see a day when we're not talking about mining and Africa. There is more to Africa than mining. Mm-hmm. Okay? But if you are in mining, good, come and do mining. But that's not what it's about.
So Strive, I've just got a couple more questions for you, and then I know you need to escape. He's on a
not to escape, there's great, all these wonderful people, no, I just have to go and make some money.
Yes, exactly, exactly, which we need you to do. We need you to do, and it brings me very neatly into my question, which is, you know, we know so much about your business interests, but actually, I think sometimes the philanthropic side of people like yourself who are investing the time that you have with the entrepreneurs, but also money in terms of the philanthropy you're doing through Delta Philanthropies and also Higher Life Foundation, which you're doing with Tsitsi, with your wife. And so what do you see? Is this an important part? Does it go hand in hand with your wearing your business head? Is it, you know, is it an important part of your daily schedule, or how does it fit into your working life?
In turn, you know, from, you know, we began this wonderful conversation talking about the tragic situation around COVID. But COVID wasn't the first pandemic. I was involved in the HIV pandemic. And at the time that pandemic was rolling out, I ran a construction business. And I realized that a lot of my workers were dying from HIV and AIDS, and I realized that they were leaving young children. So my wife and I at the dinner table one day decided, you know what, we're not going to let this child of any one of us people that dies not have an opportunity at a full education. So we created a scholarship program for these kids. But after a while, as you know, as God blessed us, we realized that we didn't have to do it just for our own workers. So we opened up our program as we proceeded along the years. Today we have educated over 250,000 children through this program. Thank you. And you know, one day my wife came to me and she said, you know, our kids are getting older, because she always refers to them as our kids. She says our kids are getting older because she runs it full-time with about 200 full-time members of staff. And she said, what do we do about university? I said, the same we would do for our own children. If any of them come and say, I've got qualifications to go to university, we must pay. And so we've got programs around universities. At any given time, we have at least 50 kids in American universities. We have kids in this country at Oxford. We have kids even at Tsinghua in China. So this, and education philanthropy is ground zero. And it is the cheapest form of philanthropy. And the wonderful thing about being in education, you don't have to be a billionaire. You can do education even if you're just working. It costs $200 to keep a child in school in Africa, you know? And yet there's nothing more gratifying in this world than to have a child walk up to you, as often happens to me, and say, Mr. Masiyiwa, I am a graduate, and these are my children, and you help me.
Fantastic.
You know, I'll live for that 100 times over.
Yeah.
So as you get older, don't get to that point where you regret not having done something as simple as just send a few kids to school. With that, we're going to be okay.
It's a really powerful message to end our conversation on today. And Strive, thank you for your time. You've shared experiences, you've shared your story. We'd love to have you back again in the future when we can find some time again with you. But in the meantime, we're really grateful for you having the chance to come and speak to the audience. Some of them seasoned African practitioners, some of them new to Africa, but they'll all be inspired by the story that you've told here today. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.